Hi, this is Paul. I had a long plane ride home and I was able to listen to a bunch of videos that I had queued up on my phone. And one of the videos that I listened to was Jordan Peterson's message to the CEO of Twitter. Now, his message videos, I don't think are very good. I'll just say it that way. I think those videos make him weak. Now, one of the most interesting things Peterson said and was known for is this admonition, don't say anything that makes you weak. And especially the video to the CEO of Twitter. Throughout that video, he keeps telling how horrible the platform is and how destructive the platform is and how weak he is before the platform and how poorly he behaves on it, all the while getting the message that what the video is about is that they should let him back on the platform. It's an absolutely bizarre video. And, that on the heels of what I thought were a number of really good videos. Just today, just the Q&A from an appearance that he made in Manchester, apparently, where he's asked about the Queen's passing. I mean, this was Jordan sort of at his best. He had a wonderful conversation with Kurt Jaimungal. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I'm a little ways into it. But again, this is the same guy. I listened to the Improving the World video about climate, and I thought, that was an outstanding conversation, and his participation in the conversation was lucid. It was measured. It was all the things that I've really liked Jordan Peterson for. I thought his appearance on Lex Fridman was good. I do want to really dive into John Vervaeke's appearance on Lex Fridman because I think in some ways it's an interesting contrast between Jordan and John by looking at them both on Lex Fridman. I really liked, it was kind of a strange video, but it took, I thought, it took a lot of courage, and I thought it was exactly the Jordan Peterson that I was impressed with to post his conversation with Greg Hurwitz with Jonathan Peugeot sort of moderating. And I assume they were down in Miami when they were filming this big conversation going on about Exodus. And so, people have asked me what I thought of that video. And I said, in some ways, the video has left me more confused because there's this Jordan Peterson that, in the words of David Fuller, is kind of a guy yelling at the internet. And then this Jordan Peterson that is measured and reasonable, and I think is doing us all a real service. I think one of the issues here is focus. I really don't know what he's doing in any of these message videos. He's, as Hurwitz said, I mean, longer form is in almost every case. The longer Jordan goes, the better he gets. If you want to look at someone who does really well making videos of his blog posts, look at Doug Wilson. Okay, so content aside, Doug Wilson delivers those blog and Mablog videos really, really well. And they've got sort of the background right. He's sort of in a studio. He is in a studio, and Wilson's a preacher, so Peterson's a very accomplished public speaker. So, but there are real issues with this. And the more I looked at these videos, especially the Twitter video, the more I thought about this, what he said in this, in this video, part of the biblical series.
I guess it was because I was trying to figure out who I was and how that could be fixed, something like that. I started to pay very careful attention to what I was saying. I don't know if that happened voluntarily or involuntarily, but I could feel a sort of split developing in my psyche, and the split, and I've actually had students tell me the same thing that has happened to them after they've listened to some of the material that I've been describing to all of you.
Now, and again, part of what I do see is a split in who he is. Now, given in the Lex Fridman interview, you just look at, again, and I've been very clear about the damage that has been done to his life. He's the subject of like 10 lawsuits he mentioned. He, travels by private plane. He, stays in little out of the way hotels. In the video it intimated that he's got bodyguards or people that accompany him. He can't go on the street, not because he's necessarily worried about his own safety, but because he doesn't have any privacy. And who of us would like to not be able to go to the store or out for a walk with your wife or something like that? I mean, all of that is part of what happens with fame. But there's a split in him, and I think part of what gave so much enthusiasm around him in 2018 was it seemed like here was a public figure that was really going to be able to perform on a public stage in such a way that he was going to transcend the culture war and really be able to do some things with it. And again, the guy that we find in these videos, really well. The guy that we find in these videos, I think he's just making himself weaker.
But I split into two, let's say. And one part was the old me that was talking a lot and that liked to argue and that liked ideas. And there was another part that was watching that part, like just with its eyes open and neutrally judging. And the part that was neutrally judging was watching the part that was talking and going, that isn't your idea. You don't really believe that. You don't really know what you're talking about. That isn't true. And I thought, that's really interesting.
Now, part of my issue with his message videos isn't really necessarily about the content. I mean, what he says about Twitter is absolutely true. I'm still on the platform. I think it takes a lot of skill to behave positively on the platform and use it in a positive way. And I think part of that is involved with scale and fame. I don't have a lot of trouble on Twitter. I think I've had some small missteps in the past. I have certain rules that I have in terms of what I will and won't do on Twitter. But and my account is relatively small. I think it's more and more difficult the larger you get. And many of the points that he made, I did a little commentary on his message to the churches. Many of the points that he made, I think were very, very valid. In fact, in the mean tweets, he read a letter from a couple of CEOs, and I thought those letters were absolutely outstanding. Those letters were critiquing what he did. And again, I think the Peterson that can make a video trying to engage with his performance, this is the kind of Peterson that I very much appreciate, and this is the kind of Peterson that's what I'm here for. This stuff, not so much.
So now and that was happening to like 95% of what I was saying. And so then I didn't really know what to do. I thought, okay, this is strange. So maybe I've fragmented, and that's just not a good thing at all. I mean, it wasn't like I was hearing voices or anything like that. I mean, it wasn't like that. It was well, people have multiple parts. So then I had this weird conundrum. It was like, well, which of these two things are me? Is it the part that's listening and saying, no, that's rubbish, that's a lie, you're doing that to impress people, you're just trying to win the argument, Was that me, or was the part that was going about my normal verbal business me? And I didn't know, but I decided I would go with the critic. And then what I learned to do, I think, was to stop saying things that made me weak.
And I remember him saying that the first time, and he said it quite a bit, and I thought, what does that mean? Stop saying things that make me weak.
And now I'm still trying to do that, because I'm always feeling when I talk whether or not the words that I'm saying are either making me align or making me come apart. And I think I really do think the alignment I think alignment is the right way of conceptualizing it, because I think if you say things that are as true as you can say them, let's say, then they come up They come out of the depths inside of you. Because well, we don't know where thoughts come from. We don't know how far down into your substructure the thoughts emerge. We don't know what processes of physiological alignment are necessary for you to speak from the core of your being. We don't understand any of that. We don't even...
And I don't really think... I mean, the core of your being sort of sounds like something from the secret sacred self. I don't think that's the best conceptualization. I think if he wants to use his logos language, I think to speak in keeping with the logos, to speak in keeping with that which is right. Now, again, with these mean tweets, or with these message videos, even though a lot of what he's saying, and with the back off globalists, he adjusted his posture, and I think that was a big improvement when he just stopped sounding so angry, because in a sense there's a weakness to defensiveness, especially in a public realm, and I think the epitome of weakness was in fact the Twitter, the message to the Twitter CEO. I mean, defensive, angry, petty. They both had sour grapes. And even playing the victim. I mean, when you look at Jesus, even though a big part of the logos of the cross, which is what the rough draft for Sunday sermon was about, and it really struck me when I was preparing for that sermon and I was going through the text in Greek, even though I've read that text a number of times. It's the logos of the cross that puts the wisdom of the world to shame. And so you really want to align sort of with the logos of the cross.
Conceptualize that, but I believe that you can feel that, and I learned some of that from reading Carl Rogers, by the way, who's a great clinician, because he talked about mental health in part as the coherence between the spiritual or the abstract and the physical, that the two things were aligned, and there's a lot of idea of alignment in psychoanalytic and clinical thinking. But anyways, I decided that I would start practicing not saying things that would make me weak. And what happened was that I had to stop saying almost everything that I was saying. I would say 95% of it. It's a hell of a shock to wake up, and I mean, this was over a few months, but it's a hell of a shock to wake up and realize that you're mostly dead wood. It's a shock. And you might think, well, do you really want all of that to burn off? It's like, well, there's nothing left but a little husk, 5% of you. It's like, well, if that 5% is solid, then maybe that's exactly what you want to have happen.
And again, you see some solid in these videos. That moment in the Lex Fridman video when he talks about love, it's a powerful moment. He's taken a lot of crap for his positions on climate, but the video with these other two guys, I thought it was a solid video. The stuff he did with Kurt, I mean, that was sort of the solid Jordan that we've seen, all the material that he's done before. His comments about the Queen's passing, his comments about fame and Trump. Maybe I should play some of that, because I think part of that is figuring into this.
How could the death of the Queen affect the boundaries between English communities around the world?
It's interesting that he changes the question slightly.
How could the death of the Queen affect the boundaries between English-speaking communities around the world? Well, I suppose it could go one of two ways. One is that, and this would be a terrible thing, it's such...
And I really like Jordan when he's with Tammy. Tammy really does something for him. Tammy really grounds him, and in many ways, I think, I haven't seen them together that often, but when he was in Santa Rosa when I was there, and when I met them afterwards, Tammy really grounds him, and yeah.
It's such bad timing in some sense, I think, for what happened today to have happened. I'm a great admirer of the constitutional monarchy system. I think there's a wisdom about it, especially the way that your country has managed it, which is more, it's worked better than how any other country's managed it, maybe ever. That's really something. You know, there are obviously monarchical systems, constitutional monarchy still left in Europe, but they're kind of a pale reflection of what you've got in the UK. And when Tammy and I were in Kentucky a couple of months ago, we were invited there by the former ambassador from the US to Canada, and she was, and her husband were fundraisers for Donald Trump. And he runs a coal mine, so you can imagine why he's Republican. And so we were at the Kentucky Derby, which is quite the show. The Americans, they're very theatrical, man. They can put on a show like no one else. And the Kentucky Derby is definitely a show. People wear the most preposterous outfits, you know, these wild lime green suits and these amazing sort of Victorian costumes for the women, and they're all dressed up. There's like 160,000 people at the racetrack, and it's quite the spectacle. And we were up above the racetrack, about 3 floors, in this glassed-in cafe. And the second day we were there, Trump was going to come to the cafe, to the restaurant. And I had flown out that morning to give a commencement address at this conservative college in northern Michigan. And then I flew back, and just after I got there, they closed the airport. So I just got in. They closed the airports because the president is coming to town, the former president, but they still call him the president. And so really the whole city, in some real sense, was locked down. And then I got to the Derby, back to the Derby, and just in time, because they're going to lock down the whole Derby. So that meant no one, 160,000 people, no one gets in or out. And then the army came in, and there was like 300 guys in camouflage, quite armed, and they were taking up their stations. And this is like 3 hours before Trump showed up. And then the Secret Service came in, and by that time,
it costs taxpayers a lot for Trump to go to the Kentucky Derby, I guess.
I had made it upstairs to the restaurant where Tammy was, and she'd been there waiting, and everyone was buzzing away about the fact that Trump was coming. And the atmosphere was electric, you know. And I thought, sitting there, I thought, this must have been what it was like to be, well, around the Kennedys, say, in the 1960s, that level of fame. I've been around famous people a lot now, and there are definitely tiers of fame, you know. There's not famous, and that's normal. And then there's celebrities that are maybe known locally and nationally, and then there are celebrities that are known internationally, and then there's celebrities like the Queen, who everyone everywhere in the world knows, who among famous people, they're hyper famous. And Trump is in that category. And he's a very strange person in that category, I would say, because he's not just famous for being president, which is already something that makes you pretty damn famous, but he was really famous as a businessman before that, and as a nouveau riche sort of businessman, and as a kind of brash entrepreneur and a character, and he was very famous for that. But then he got even more famous as a TV celebrity for like 15 years, and that's actually really hard, you know, regardless of what you think about it ethically, or, you know, whether you think the kind of entertainment that he did, that he involved himself in was worthwhile. I don't care about that. That's not my point. My point is that managing that successfully for 15 years is exceptionally unlikely and difficult, and he was extremely famous as a consequence, and that was sort of laden on top of his fame on the business front. And then he became president, and so that's a lot of fame, man. And when that much fame surrounds you, your life is very weird. And the probability...
And you know, again, if you watch the Lex Fridman, Jordan's life has gotten very weird. I mean, he only eats beef and salt and carbonated water. You get into a bubble.
That people are going to respond to you in the normal way that helps keep you sane is very low.
And I think this is part of it. And again, people have commented on this before, but his loss of his life. You know, yeah, okay, so he's famous and he's wealthy now, but what a price to pay. The loss of his life. I remember C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis got more famous in America than he was in the UK. And he didn't want to be very famous because he wanted to have a life. And the loss of his life is to just be a professor with students and to hear from students and to be around students and then to be a clinical psychologist, to sit there and be face to face with people with deep problems and to wrestle with those people with deep problems. And all of that gives you, all of that was so much of what made his lectures and his talks so vital. Someone on this trip told me that he said, part of the reason I listen to your channel is you are still the pastor of a local church. So even though I was just, had tiny little bit of experiencing fame when I go to the UK, and lovely people turn out to see me and to talk to me, and the biggest regret is that I don't have time to adequately listen to all of them. But I did get a chance to listen to some of you and get to know some of you a little bit. But I got back here to Florin Road, and some homeless person is leaving his clothing out to dry on the new fence that we put up, and there's stuff to clean up and stuff to do. And Freddie called me right away when I got back in the country, and my fantasy football team needs attending to. I got to set my lineup for Sunday, and I got to preach Sunday, and I'm just back to local me, and all of that keeps me sane, because it's all of the stuff that everyone has to deal with of trying to make life work and trying to live, and all of that. You lose all of that when you get into this fame bubble. And so I sort of asked myself, what are examples of how one should respond? And a bunch of people had said, oh, the Bishop Barron Shia LaBeouf video was outstanding, and it is. And when I finally dig into the Vervaeke Lex Fridman conversation, when we talk about practice, I have a lot of thoughts about practice, having been in Europe and thinking about how the practices of the church for centuries, build their way into European culture in ways that are not in American culture. Some of it got transported via immigration, but a lot of it didn't. And there's this portion here in this video where I never heard of Padre Pio, and so I'm gonna have to educate myself a little bit on that. But sounds like quite a remarkable figure of not too long ago who reportedly had stigmata and fighting with the devil, and some of that gets into some of what I think. So I'm kind of thinking I've got a whole bunch of videos in my head I want to do, and I don't have that much time to do them. But hit this little section right here when I think about, okay, Jordan, you're kicked off of Twitter. Lots of people treat you poorly. You sort of were at your peak in some ways with the Kathy Newman interview. In that interview, I think part of the reason that interview was so dynamic and so explosive, and everybody looked at that and said, wow, he's a person to watch. I remember in one of his things he said, human beings are like, I don't know if this is true or not because this isn't my area of expertise, but the same circuits in our brain that look for food, look for information. And I think part of the reason we so quickly attach ourselves to someone like a hero, or someone to listen, or someone to follow, and to be a fan of someone or a disciple of someone, is because they do something that shows us something remarkable. And in that Kathy Newman interview, he showed us something remarkable and had this really nuanced balance of, you could say, speaking truth to power, because of course Kathy Newman had all the power, and Jordan just moment by moment just did amazingly in that. And what Shia LaBeouf has to say here I thought was really quite remarkable. Not talking about himself, but Father Pio.
It's just like stiff. Mm-hmm. Pio wasn't stiff. Pio was, like you say, he was almost a dancer. And so you're trying to build this mass that Pio is known for. It'd be like playing Dylan and not knowing how to play guitar. Mm-hmm. If you want to play Dylan, you don't just read Dylan biographies. Right. You have to pick a guitar up, and you have to learn. how to play a guitar. And then the guitar needs to be your best friend. And then you need to sleep with the guitar. And then the guitar needs to be your only travel companion.
Yeah.
That's the way into Dylan.
Right.
The way
Now, you know, when he gives that illustration, I think just about how the normal practices of life shape us. It's not our aspirations. It's not even our goals. You know, it is our goals, what we aspire, but what we pay attention to and all of that. But this is one thing, of course, the monastics knew. And, you know, my conversation with Phil about communal housing, communal living, he knew that. It's all the normal things of life. And so part of what made Peterson so dynamic in that moment is all of those years with students. All just undergrads and graduate students. You know, you teach an undergraduate class, and it's, you know, all of that interaction, and then the grad students, so a level up, and all of that interaction, and the study, and all of that discipline, and then the close attention that he had to pay to his clinical practice, where you're just looking, and the maladies and the disease in our souls and our behavior and our practice are so difficult to pull apart, so that through months and even years of working with someone, you just begin to see incremental improvement. You get a real appreciation for just how much of an enemy sin is.
The way into Pio was Mass. And it wasn't until I felt like I started having emotional reactions in Mass that I feel like I was anywhere near playing Pio. And Mass got very emotional. Like really.
I've got a lot of thoughts about this video and thoughts about practice. And, you know, is a Mass in the movies the Mass when you have an actor doing it? Because, you know, we're getting into questions of performance, and not really just performance, but practice. And so much of this is bound up in let's say, the Protestant Reformation.
Really emotional. And then I felt like, okay, now I have permission to go study Pio. So then the Pio study started, and that took us to Italy. Then I started going to where he studied, in San Giovanni Rotondo, and you see it, and something was offsetting about it, because what I knew of Pio to that point was like, this is a man of deep humility who's offering up his suffering. And you walk into San Giovanni, and you see this big mosaic of this man, and there's pictures of him watching them build it. And my first inroad into what James was talking about, offering your suffering up and offering your ego up and entirely, is I always pictured a priest would be so against the idea that he's being put on this Mount Rushmore in this town. And what I'm seeing in this man is like deep utility, deep focus. Like a man who's just so laser beam focused. He doesn't care if you think he's ridiculous. He doesn't care if the church thinks he's ridiculous. He doesn't care.
Which it did for a long time. That's part of the drama of Padre Pio, right?
Which was
As a
another
young
inroad
man,
for me.
Basically 10 years.
Exile.
The church said, you know,
don't celebrate Mass.
Right.
Sit in this room.
And by the end of his life, he's this living saint, and now he's this, you know, one of the great saints of the 20th century. But during his lifetime,
yeah,
he went through a real
darkness,
psychological and spiritual suffering.
With not much to lean on, other than like a few spiritual advisors and people who he would celebrate Mass out of his window, because he wasn't allowed in the church anymore. Yeah. He wasn't allowed out of his room anymore. When you go to San Giovanni Rotondo, there's his room, and then there's a chapel, a small little chapel the size of this table that they built for him. There's like 5 chairs in there.
Yeah.
That's where he would celebrate Mass for like 10 years. And he would open a window and he would celebrate Mass, and he would hear.
Don't despise small places and small things. You know, this another thing that Peterson, he's always watching the metrics, and he's complaining about Twitter. I've 3 million, so almost 3 million followers on Twitter, yada yada yada. Size says some things, but don't despise small things. There's tremendous power in smallness.
Hear the crowd outside, and it felt like this, you know, and not to minimize Pio, but or aggrandize myself, but this is another inroad for me where exiled, you're nuclear, you're a depraved individual, you're disgusting, we don't want nothing to do with you anymore. And I'm
and this, of course, is he's talking about his own story, his own, all of the, exiled from Hollywood, taken away from his career, et cetera, et cetera. And then how do you react to that? Do you use your stage to hit back?
Feeling that in Pio, because this is what the church said to him as well. You're doing it wrong. You're a no-no. You're persona non grata.
I think they weren't sure what to do with him. I think they were just thrown off. Like, what is this?
Well,
And it took him a long time to figure him out.
When he claimed stigmata, the church at the time sent a bunch of rationalist, unbelieving people who thought miracles were impossible and we were beyond the age of miracles. Yeah. And he's got his hands wrapped and they're saying, let me see. And he's saying no. And then they write him off. You're a liar.
Yeah. You're
a liar and you're using the church to sensationalize and create a spectacle out here so you can sell keychains or whatever they thought they was doing, And so they write him off as a crazy, as a lunatic, a person who is pimping the church is what they thought. And he had genuinely experienced something.
Which is true of a lot of the mystics too, that the church has a hard time taking them in at first, and it takes a while to figure them out. But no, I like how you're using that though as a way into your own life experience.
Because again, I'm feeling all this deep identification. Like here's another example of a man who, when he was exiled, he didn't hit Twitter.
Right.
He didn't go on Twitter and say, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. He just got quiet.
Yeah.
He got quiet and he said, is that so? And then he continued doing what served him and the people that he was serving. He didn't get loud. He didn't do the Martin Luther. He did the St. Francis. Which was he quietly got more Christ-like and cultivated that as opposed to like this rebellion.
He accepted it.
He accepted
the judgment of the church.
Yeah, he could have started his own church, started his own order.
Right.
He had that much following. He could have at that moment walked off into the woods and created a whole new sect of Catholicism.
Right. And there are a lot of people in the tradition who did things just like that. Probably mystics who had some legitimate sense of God, but they didn't keep communion with the church.
Yes.
But let's go back to the stigmata.
So I thought that was powerful because I want to be very careful here because, if I were in Peterson's shoes, and I'm by no means in his shoes, how would I react? Would I react any better than him? I don't know. But again, I sort of thought that don't say anything that makes you weak. I think these are making him weak. And I thought Greg had his friend had a lot of really good things to say. And I was amazed. I mean, there again, I saw more of the Peterson that I had seen before. Even just to have the courage to put that video on. And even I think the first, I think some of the comments I saw on there didn't understand, but I don't know. So what do you think? I know, my opinion on these message videos, they got big views, but I don't know. I think it makes him look weak. I think there are ways to respond to the attacks, not grabbing the victim mantle, not the defensiveness, but more of what we know that he's capable of because we've seen him do it before. Whether he's still capable of it, given the way that, the ways that fame has changed him, I don't know. So let me know what you think.